Hi, my name is Mattia, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome to my guest, Stefanie Nielsen. She is a person that I encountered on the internet a while back, and then I recently found her podcast called Strength Discovered, which I absolutely loved. And we have some other things in common that we may get into today, but I'm going to have Stefanie introduce herself, however she would like to present herself today.
Well, for me, I I hate labels and I don't know how to introduce myself other than I am an awareness in this physical body experiencing this human thing, and it's kind of cool and it's kind of hard, but at the same time, I don't even know how to introduce myself anymore because I've had so many identity shifts over the last, say, 10 plus years. That it's like, I don't know, I am who I am in this moment. And I feel like that's enough.
I love that. And I also just want to pull out what you said right before we started recording, which was, I'm not going to say it as eloquently as you did, but something about just being present in your body, and that's, that you didn't prepare for this other than having listened to, some of my podcasts, but that you're just here. And I love that so much because I just want to notice and name, I'm often the down regulating presence in a conversation. I've been noticing lately that, or recognizing and putting the pieces together, that one of my strange little bits of magic is I help people sleep better. That's just a thing. So
Mhm.
I'm often the person that's like, the down regulating or calmer presence. And you are down regulating me in this like lovely way and like calming me down, because I was coming in with like, okay, I'm right on time, and like, oh, I don't have these little things together, and you're already calming me down. So I would like to thank you for that energy that you're bringing already.
Yeah, well, I came in nervous too, so it's nice to know that. And I did some grounding techniques getting back in my body before I hopped on. And so if anybody's worrying about nerves, that's one of my secrets, getting back in my body.
Yeah. I would love to hear what you did if you were down for sharing those techniques.
For me, I practice a meditative movement called Qigong. And I just picked one of my favorite moves that tends to drop me down into my low belly and calms my mind. Because for me, I do have C-PTSD, which is a complex trauma issue. So me being back in my body is the secret for me to actually be present instead of constantly living in trauma responses.
Yeah. And what was that journey like for you? I also have CPTSD. Even getting the safety to feel like I could start getting into my body was quite a journey. Was that true for you also? Like, what was your journey of starting to get into your body?
Oh yeah. I thought I was already in my body. I'll just preface it with that. Like I thought
Yeah.
I was already in my body, but I noticed that every time I would go after a goal, I would be frozen. I wouldn't actually be able to follow through on that thing. And what I realized was that, oh, my body doesn't feel safe to do the thing that I know is intellectually safe. And so that process of catching my body up to the safety that I know I currently have in my life has been the journey, as still is the journey for me.
Yeah. I'm trying to decide what direction I want to go with this, because there's so many good things we could touch on. I know that one of the things we have in common is coming out of a repressive religious background, and coming out of that. That's certainly where a chunk of my CPTSD comes from, is just the weird religious stuff. And I know for me, one of the elements around that that was really hard was that I was raised, I mean, variety of things around this, also just my parents' own issues, but that I did not have bodily autonomy,
Mhm.
that, happiness or feeling good in your body was not anything worth pursuing, and, didn't really have any value. I actually, as an adult, said to one of my siblings at one point, I don't think being happy is important. And they were like, are you okay? was in my early 20s. Yeah. So just this kind of complex interaction of, the religious stuff in particular. I don't know if this was your experience, that like the body was suspect and
Oh, yeah.
pleasure was suspect. And rediscovering, even just like very basic sensory pleasure was part of that process for me of like getting back into the body. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's just a very open-ended topic if you want to talk about anything in
Yeah.
there.
I mean, it really is so synchronistic. Like I had a recent realization similar to what you're sharing of like, oh, I don't actually allow myself simple pleasures. It's always pressure. It's always the next thing that needs to get done. It's never actually just enjoying this moment for what it is, being present in my body. And that affects so many areas of life, like not
Mm-hmm.
being conditioned into believing that the body is somehow bad and like
Right.
not okay to enjoy that human experience that we're all having, and really diminishing that pleasure aspect. And for me, like when you turn down something like pleasure, it creates this way of living that is so stagnant and repetitive, almost like you're living in a zone of numbness where you can't really feel things all the way because you've been taught to cut off your vehicle through which you feel things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, oh my goodness, zone of numbness, like part of what that makes me think of, I haven't even really thought about this consciously before, that from that place, a lot of what I was experiencing in my body was just the negative, like just
Mm.
pain, discomfort, sensory overwhelm, because I wasn't accessing or sort of consciously allowing myself to enjoy pleasure. So, yeah, that's a big one. I'll have to sit with that. uh, yeah. So you said that was a somewhat recent realization that around pleasure, like what was that?
Yeah, and for me, I have a partner. We've been together for 20 years. We have 3 kids. And then when it comes to intimacy with him and I, it is something that has always been a struggle for me because I've associated pleasure with somehow being immoral in some way. So there's this moral overlay that I received from religion that really fucked up my ability to be genuinely present and intimate with people and enjoy that process and have pleasure in that process.
And when you got together, were you still in the church?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. We were both born and raised Mormon. And our journey out of Mormonism could have torn us apart. It really could have. He actually lost interest in religion before I did. And that reason is because I was committed to living with my sister again, who had passed away when I was 5 years old. And so for me, having my husband lose interest in the very thing that was going to help me live with my family for eternity again was really challenging. And there was a period of time where I was like, okay, how can I fix this? How can I make him commit just as much as I am committed? And he was like, not budging. Like he had seen through the bullshit already. And he's like, these people have no authority over me. This is ridiculous. But me, like I wanted to be with my sister again. I was going to do everything necessary to have that happen. And it was probably over the course of a year where I realized, like, oh, if I'm going to do this by myself and stay committed by myself, I actually need to know and dig a lot deeper than what I've allowed myself to know and dig deeper with in the past. Because with Mormonism, you only look at approved materials.
Mm.
Anything outside of that is considered anti-Mormon. And that's a big no-no, a big no-no. So when I finally came to that realization of like, okay, if I'm going to commit, I got to dig down deep and make sure that I can commit to this wholeheartedly. And of course, in the process of that, you see the cracks, you see the BS, you see all the made up things that have been so harmful. And when I decided that, okay, I'm done. I am valuing my family over this external thing that has always had power over me. And goddamn, is that scary? So fucking scary. Like for me, because I do relate with being autistic. And so that religious framework was almost well, not almost, it was the only framework I had for being human and living life. And so stepping out of that framework was my first experience of an identity crisis. I lost my framework. The rug was pulled out from underneath me, and it felt like I was free falling into like being damned for all my life and never being with, what religion does to our psyches. It just really messes it up. So, but in that process of experiencing that first identity crisis, I was able to build a framework for myself. And I've noticed that since that time, I left in 2014, I've done it multiple times where I've gotten new information, have another identity crisis, and I'm like, oh, I've done this before. Okay, let's continue on. And it's been an ever evolving journey since then, which is probably why at the beginning of this podcast, the way I introduce myself is so like not tangible because I feel like identity is almost like it's useful. We need it to operate in this world and interact with other people because we're in separate forms. But at the same time, it can become a hindrance, a limitation in and of itself.
Yeah. I think about that a lot certainly in queer identities and the little like micro identities that we develop over time.
Okay. I think of identity as living in the mind, right? And how attached we get to that. And we actually think that that is who we are, this identity that we've built from birth. But it has nothing to do with who we are. It's just how we've been conditioned and the identity we've built around that conditioning. And it's just so fascinating. Like from Eastern thought, they talk about the mind like Maya, the illusion. And it's so fitting, especially for my experience of going through these different iterations. I mean, like, oh, well, that's not me, and that's not me, and that's not me, and that's not me. My mind is constantly changing. That can't be me. My emotions are constantly changing. That can't be me. My body is constantly changing. That can't be me. So who am I? And for me, it's like, I am life energy, experiencing this thing of being in this body. And that place is terrifying because there's no solid ground. But at the same time, that is where freedom for everyone, I feel like, and that's a pretty broad term, but that's where freedom is already within us. We just have to look through the illusion, peel back the layers, and realize that, oh, I am this awareness that is experiencing these other aspects of the self. And I get to direct where I'm moving and where I'm going.
I love that. And that is, I have not talked about this a lot on the podcast. I think I did talk about it once, but like that is very much my lived experience that I've landed on as well. Is like, okay, I'm just in this, meat suit. And all of this it's interesting because I remember the layers of sort of learning or lived experience that I went through to reach this. And I think each one of them is interesting in its own way. And it's also one of those experiences that you just kind of have to have for yourself, right? Like nobody can tell you, oh, by the way, you're just this, energy. Yeah. And then you're just like, oh, right. Like there's this very layered process. But there is like the thing that's come out of it for me that's been so meaningful is this feeling that I can always return to this sort of state of peace and love at any time, as long as I just let myself drop into that, like that's what's underneath.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that's not a goal that I, think people should try to reach or something, or that there's something wrong if you're not in that space, but it's certainly a lot easier to handle the stresses of day-to-day life.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, I obviously still have an identity through which I'm working with, right? Mm-hmm. It's an important part of the experience that we're having. We get to craft that. we get to choose which direction we're moving with that identity. And it just feels like the way I'm viewing it now. And like, this is a baby I'm birthing this year, like talking about this concept, helping people understand that all of these layers are important, working with the mind, working with the emotion, working with the body, but it's all directed through an awareness that has been constant and steady for your entire existence while all these things are changing.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. For me, it's like you shared, it is an experiential process. Like in order to understand like what you and I are talking about right now, it takes peeling back and looking at the conditioning that we've been given and been like, is that who I am? Is that who I am? And realizing that anytime we think we know who we are, there's going to be something else around the corner that expands that and changes that, and embracing that process of not knowing exactly who I am, but knowing that I'm this life force energy in this human form experiencing this cool thing. I feel like for me, coming from religious trauma, that takes away a higher power, like that pressure of having to please a higher power. And it brings it back into my existence right here, right now. And how can I intentionally work with that from a place of self-trust?
Mm.
And God, it's a process. It's hard, especially for me and anyone else who struggles with that disconnection. Like we cap that off, we hide that away. We were told it wasn't safe to be our authentic self, that original self, right? And so we hide it and we don't even know it's there for so long. So that access for self-trust has been something that even in the last couple months has really deepened for me as I've leaned into this idea of being fluid in my existence and not needing a solid identity structure to live through.
Mm. Yeah. And that, in my experience, comes in waves also, right? That it's kind of like this, oh, right, I've pulled away from this. Oh, right, this is, coming in and out of this experience. And I suppose living in that all the time is one version of what people would call enlightenment, which
maybe like all of those words kind of make me giggle in a way of like, okay, yeah, like we're all trying to get somewhere, but what if the place we're getting to is already right here, right now? Yeah. And that's the distraction from actually being who you are.
Yeah. And that I've been thinking about that so much in my own work, the work that I do, and in my own healing journey, just how much of my experience of healing or feeling like I needed to heal or fix something is based on that. Like that there's this place I need to get to. And once I'm there, I will be happy. And I'm sure everyone listening knows that has never been the case. There has never been an arrival point at which you were just like, oh, and I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm good. I don't need to fix anything. Right. Like if you're so, not to make that a binary paradigm, but there is this sense of if who I am right now and the experience that I'm having right now is, and that's just what it is. And I'm not even putting a label on that saying it's, good or bad, like just removing the value judgment from it altogether. This is the experience that I'm having. And I often tag on just like, and that's okay. Like that's this is an acceptable way to be or an acceptable experience. It is very different than the constant striving to be both the one that needs to be fixed and the one that is doing the fixing.
Isn't it like, okay, it's so bizarre to me. Like once you see it,
yeah,
and you're like, oh, wow, I've split myself internally. Mm-hmm. I am both the protagonist and the antagonist and the protector and all of these different pieces. It's like, oh my God, I've been conditioned in such a way that I am now doing this to myself. The systems that I was placed into and experienced, now I am re-traumatizing myself over and over and over again by trying to live up to standards that do not serve my mental, emotional, physical, or I don't like the word spiritual because of religious stuff, but like energetic health.
And it's almost like we're playing out this huge internal drama where we're playing all the characters, which can be very entertaining, I will say. It can certainly feed my ADHD desire for a lot of drama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like this aspect of also accepting all those different parts that love to create the drama within my mind and realizing that, oh, that mental loop makes sense that it's there. It's kept me safe for a long time, but it's just a mental loop. It's just a character in my mind that my mind has created, trying to prevent past trauma from recreating in the now or the future.
Right. Which is a very reasonable protective instinct on the part of the body. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, a similar phrase that you were saying, like, and it's okay. For me, it's like, and it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
This mental loop is going, and it makes sense that it is, and it's okay. And I can get back in my body and I can get present. And that mental loop starts to lose its grip on my next choice.
Mm. Can you drop into that a little bit more and just talk about what that is experientially for you in the moment?
It depends on what it is. It can be quite challenging, especially if, like, for me, because I do experience that complex trauma in an emotional flashback, it is probably the most challenging because when I experience an emotional flashback, it is like I switch realities temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm in that triggered state. And when I'm in that triggered state, and I'm going this route just for an example, because I feel like some listeners will probably relate to emotional flashback experience. When I know I'm in that red zone, I'm in that emotional flashback, and I don't have my logical brain online at all, I just pause. I walk away from whatever conversation I was in, whatever thing that triggered me, and I just breathe and get back in my body. And there's all sorts of different practices, right? Sometimes I'll just do somatic tapping where I'm breathing and tapping. Sometimes I'll do some Qigong where I'm doing a little bit more physical movement, getting myself back into my body and paying attention to the sensations in my body instead of the story my mind is making. Because the story my mind makes is rarely correct. It would be correct if I was actually zoomed back to 7 years old, right? But at 40 years old, in whatever situation it is, it's no longer applicable. So my story is off. The narrative in my mind is off. So getting back into my body, feeling the physical sensations of my emotions without trying to fix them. And for me, that's always been the tricky part because being in my body has always been a challenge because of pain, right? I've dealt with chronic pain. And getting present back in my body, feeling those sensations, I like to think of it as relaxing around the sensation that I'm noticing.
Mm.
Because the way I experience it is my default is to tense around the sensation. And I've noticed that when I think of it like relaxing around that emotional sensation in the body, it was the thing I needed, that magical piece for me that I was missing to actually allow that to move through. And once that emotion starts to move through, and it's different for everyone, I will tap during that process. There's clarity that comes, there's insight that comes, and then I can navigate the situation differently when I re-engage because I'm no longer in that alternate reality that emotional flashback had taken me into. And it's hard because it feels so real. It feels true. It feels so true in that emotional flashback. So that is the stickiest point in my experience of realizing that, oh, it's okay for me to drop into my body, to relax around that sensation and to not know and to just watch and notice. And then having the experience of doing it is different than just talking about it.
Yeah.
Because we can talk about this for a long time. I've intellectualized this process for years.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been, which I needed to do. I needed to have an intellectual framework to feel safe enough to drop into my body. So anyone who is shitting on themselves for not having this experience, if you haven't had it, don't. If you are intellectualizing a process similar, allow yourself time to really understand it in the mental layer so that you can feel safe enough to drop down into the body, to feel the emotion. And it takes practice. It's not, I'm not saying it's going to be magical. Like you'll drop in and you'll have all these insights. Like it's fucking uncomfortable. It doesn't feel nice. But with practice, I've realized that I have all the intelligence that I need when I'm in my body to navigate whatever next step is before me. And it's like this full circle thing of how the mind is a tool, but when it's the master, it's a really shitty master. It's really terrible.
Oh, so good. Yeah. The reason I'm really happy that you dug into that and described what you did and also like put the scaffolding around it that you did. I know that's going to be really helpful for people. And I just want to pull a couple more things out of that because this sort of, now that a lot more people are doing body-based work, which is awesome and great, there is this general sort of societal message that's like, oh, just get into your body, right? Like, just do it, just get into your body, which is very much like telling a person with ADHD, just focus. Or a great example I heard recently was ADHD therapist talking about kids. And he said that when he works with families, he'll often ask the parents when they come in the door, I need you to do a backflip through the door. And they're like, I can't do that. And he's like, just do a backflip. So that's his example of,
Damn, I like that. That's good.
I love it so much. I'm holding on to that one. And I just want to say that, like, around this whole thing, I want to just talk about like my perspective of why we want to get into the body and a little bit more about just sort of this early phase, which, funnily enough, even after a few years of somatic work myself, I still feel like I'm still approaching every new technique, every new modality very similarly. So I want to just like talk about my experience of this new approach where I have this unsafety and my brain is like, I don't want to, and it'll give me all these excuses. First, it's like, oh, this thing will take too long, or, oh, my ankle feels weird. It's like not even pain. It's just like, I don't know. Right. So I'm getting all these kind of, I don't know messages. That's a signal to me that I don't feel safe doing this thing right now. So I love that you mentioned the, intellectualizing or just like letting your, brain heavy parts like take this on and understand, why is this practice helpful for some people? What is the end result of this practice? Or like, what am I looking for? What's the point at which I get to go, oh, I did it. Like, it's done because I either figured this thing out or had this experience. And also maybe figuring out, what's the point at which I say, this is not working for me? Like, this is not feeling good, or I'm not getting there, or I need a different approach, because no technique is going to work for every person. There's a reason there are thousands of body-based techniques available. And so for me, a lot of the point is to be able to access more of that information in the body. So that's one reason to go in. Another is what you were describing around like relaxing around the sensation. That often relieves physical pain or tension. It can, make things easier. Just have this like easier experience. And it's not about eliminating it completely. If you find a technique that works like that for you, though, use it. But you don't need to tell people that, because if you find a technique that works that well for you, nobody needs to tell you to do it. You're just like, hell yeah, this is my everyday. This is the thing I do all the time now. Right. So yeah, there's definitely this like front loading information aspect can be helpful, or ignore that and just try it, right? Like, some people are just like, I just want to jump in, try it a little bit, see if it feels a little bit better than you did before. So again, maybe it's not the big fireworks final version of it initially, but maybe you do it and you're just like, oh yeah, I feel a little bit more relaxed. I feel a little bit more present. And then this whole like, what is the point of being in your body? Well, I think it's to be able to experience pleasure in the moment. So if being in your body is very much not pleasurable for you for a variety of reasons, I don't know that there's a lot of point for most people in being super, super present in just a shit ton of discomfort or pain, or, not being ready for this, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is a point, and I'm sure there are therapeutic approaches that push that, but like, anyway, I've been talking for a long time, but I feel very passionately about this subject, that like we titrate into the body in a way that feels good and safe enough. And eventually really cool things happen. Like in my case, most of my physical problems like significantly lessening or going away eventually, but that was not the initial goal. I didn't know those things were going to happen. That I was just trying to feel a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a question in there or
Oh
not, but
no,
I love what
that
I
was just
loved
me
what you
like
just shared.
building on
Man.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, I feel like there's a lot of pressure when it comes to
Yeah.
healing.
Yep.
There's like, okay, I'm going to approach healing just like I do with my productivity mindset that's been downloaded into my psyche, right? That will backfire. At least it did for me. When I tried to navigate my healing the same way I was taught to be productive, it did not work
Mm.
because there's so much pressure. There's so much judging myself of not being where I thought I should be. And anytime we have that judgment piece, it takes us out of the reality we're actually working with and brings us up into the mind because the mind is always categorizing, always putting things with labels and all of this. How does it all work? And like that,
Judging.
disentangling productivity from the healing process or the healing direction is so what was so powerful for me and still is of realizing that I'm exactly where I am right now. And this is the only place I can move from. I can't move from anywhere else. So I may as well accept the parts and pieces that I'm working with so I can actually work with what's in front of me. Like not accepting something about myself or an aspect of myself handicaps me because I'm not working with all the information that's here in the moment. I'm working with only the information I want to accept or to be true.
Which is always going to be the case.
Yes, because we have blind spots, which is why I've shifted from my own individual healing in an isolation type approach to healing in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are aspects of myself that I didn't realize I couldn't heal with just me, that I had to heal them in relationship because those wounds occurred in relationship.
Mm.
So that sense of community too, like there's this individual healing, but there's also this relational healing, actually experiencing safety with another human being. There's something extremely powerful about that, especially with complex trauma, where you're not safe with yourself. You can't trust yourself. You're not safe with other people. You can't trust other people. So that is the process or the step or phase, whatever. If I had to put myself in a phase, that's probably where I'm at right now. And it is uncomfortable, so uncomfortable. But my family dynamics, I married for 20 years. I've got 3 kids. They're transforming because of this, because of me having the courage to be uncomfortable and speak my truth from being grounded inside my body. I couldn't do that from my mind.
Right.
What is your experience with like individual healing and like relational healing?
Yeah. This is another big topic I've been thinking about a lot lately, that the sort of like white model of healing is individual, right? The sort of like white supremacist, you know, and I really think that part of that is part of what that system does is keeps us separate and kind of like working off in our own corner rather than coming together in any kind of organized way. And the relational healing, the community healing, that's where it actually becomes fully embodied in my experience. So I can have useful intellectual experiences on my own. I can even have useful embodied experiences on my own and be like, oh, I get it. I finally get it. I finally feel like I'm enough. And then I have some very particular tiny conflict, in a triggering area for me, like the kitchen. And suddenly again, it's that like, oh shit, this is how I actually apply this thing. And I have to be able to get enough distance from it physically or emotionally to be able to drop back into that knowledge that I got before on my own. So that is where the individual part comes in for me, is I do a lot of my processing and healing uh, feeling safe enough to become embodied by myself because I am completely, I've got my own space and I, know that I'm okay in that space. And then it's in the relational moments that I actually deeply, fully embody it outside of the theoretical.
I love that. Yes. I love talking about this stuff so much. Like, if it's so bizarre, like, if I'm in a conversation with someone and like these kinds of topics are like off limits, I don't know what to talk about with them because like they're not accessible and present. Like, to
Mm.
actually like be transparent with an internal experience is, and maybe this is an autism thing, I don't know, of only wanting to talk about my special interest. Who knows? But I find it really challenging to be in relationship with people who aren't also embracing the process of healing
Mm-hmm.
in whatever that looks like for them. Like, my partner and I, we have very different approaches to this of like personal growth and evolution, and honoring that those processes are going to be different for the people that I love. Yeah, but I feel like that might have been a little bit of a tangent.
No, totally. And one thing I actually noticed that was really interesting was I was actually, as I was becoming more present and like almost in a certain sense, not what I'm recommending, fighting to be present. Like it felt like this constant, like almost fight I was having with myself that I, again, just let myself go in and out of somewhat. But it did feel a bit confrontational with myself initially when I was still in that space. I would get really triggered by other people not being present because I think it reminded me or just like threw me back into because my family experience growing up with my six siblings is that most of us were very dissociated most of the time.
Mm.
And we all had very spotty memories of our childhood. So, and that we've kind of like reconstructed together by talking about things and being like, oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that major traumatic event. Like, I was just not there when that happened. Like I was dissociated. So, when I see other people, they're not even necessarily dissociating, right? They might just literally be reading something or looking at something on their phone. But when I'm trying to engage with someone and they're not equally engaged with me, I sometimes feel, and like, especially I'm thinking of this point a couple of years ago when I was like really doing this, I would feel really triggered by it. And it's so funny because then I had the exact interaction with my partner the other day where I was like petting the feral cat who was inside, who we've been taking care of, who's in here for a couple hours a day. And they were trying to talk to me about something important. And they were like, well, maybe we can just talk about this later. And I was like, rather than getting defensive, I was able to just be like, oh, they're just having this exact experience that I've had many times, which is they're feeling a little bit triggered by me not being fully present. And we were able to navigate that. But just, man, one of dozens of experiences I've had where I look back and I'm like, yeah, I actually was the drama in like I literally started the fight or, was the triggered person. And looking back, I see just countless occasions where it was literally my trauma that was the problem in a relationship and not the other person who I was blaming at that time for triggering
Mhm.
me.
Oh, so much. Yes. Like, I have realized that in my partnership, I'm definitely the one that brings the trauma drama,
Mhm.
right? And I've just started being transparent when I'm triggered. I'll be like, hey, babe, my mind is telling me this. Can you give me accurate information about how you're feeling right now so that that can just quiet down?
Oh, I love that.
And that's been the thing that has given me the most growth in my marriage, is embracing transparency on my end, being direct, being kind, dropping my ego so I can listen, and really getting honest with myself of like, oh, this whole loop that's based in trauma is the thing that's creating the issue. It's the thing that's blocking me from being present in my relationship that is actually a safe relationship to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, there are people who are in situations where they're not safe.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's a very different conversation.
Very different.
And it can be, yeah, I mean, this is another huge topic. But but, it can be an important part of healing to get space from those types of relationships, whether or not, like, if you feel truly unsafe, you can't just make yourself feel safe, right? Like, this is another thing. It's like your body mind system is checking, it's scanning for safety in some way 4 times a second. You can't turn that system off. You can't just like stop scanning for safety, nor would you want to. So sometimes, that is where the individual side of healing is useful, is when you need more space
Mm.
to get to the point of feeling safe. So now you can come to the relational or community side of it and be, grounded enough to be able to actually have those interactions, as opposed to being, flung all the way into a flashback and be, not really experiencing current reality, basically, in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I like the way you said that.
And, another huge topic, like this comes up a lot in activist spaces where everybody there is traumatized. And it's just so, so, so common. And I'm also thinking of like friends who've started communes that have fallen apart, where it's just like everybody's traumatized. And the conflicts that are happening are, it's everybody's trauma just kind of grinding together.
Mm.
And I would never tell any individual person in that situation, oh, you just stop acting traumatized, right? Like stop being traumatized and everything will be okay. It's like, no, because you pushing that down is also going to cause harm eventually, probably to you. So it's this really, interesting, complex thing where we're like trying to feel safe enough so that we can come to the relational side of healing and actually embody that. But it almost requires everybody involved to at least be coming in with kind intentions, right?
Mm. Yeah, at the very least.
Yeah. uh, yeah. I wrote down my mind is telling me this. Can you give me accurate info about how you're feeling? Because I'm gonna use that line. That's really good.
I've even used that line in a text message of I'm in a triggered state, my mind is going crazy, and I'll text my partner. My mind won't turn off. Can you tell me the accurate information from your perspective of what you just experienced? And he will. That particular time I'm talking about, he was down the stairs within 10 seconds to give me clarification because he knows that's important for me and my brain to be like, oh, okay, this is the evidence from my partner whom I trust. This is the trauma loop, which is based in the past. And like really, I'm going to say diving in to understanding the inner workings of my brain. You're like, oh, okay, that's a narrative. And any narrative I have is not, I'm going to say, not based in reality. And that's coming from a book I recently read about No Self, No Problem is the title of it. And he really talks about how the left brain narrative, any left brain narrative that the brain creates, is only plausible, not necessarily based in truth. The brain doesn't care about truth. It's just plausibility and whatever's easiest with the context that we have mapped in our brain.
Which I think is also why we cyclically see, for example, a little slice of generation where everybody's obsessed with narcissists and like labeling everyone a narcissist. And then you go like 10 years later and like that's not really a term younger people are using that much, for example, which isn't to say that it doesn't exist or isn't happening, but like there is definitely this slice of time where that was like the thing, right? It was like everybody's a narcissist. And anyway, I think that's the context people were working with, you having these labels. And like actually I like that example because my family has traditionally called my dad a narcissist, and I am realizing that he probably actually does not meet clinical narcissist terms, even though he hits a lot of the boxes. He's just an extremely traumatized autistic person. And so he has a lot of those qualities. So anyway, I think that there's this, it's very easy to label other people
Mm.
and be seeing, a few pieces of data, especially with a problem or a pattern seeking brain, as I have, just to go like, oh, they check these boxes, it's not that I'm seeing all the evidence. It's that my schema sees those things and it's like, close enough. You go in that box. And I have to actively fight that tendency in my own brain with other people, because I would never want to be labeled or put in a box like that myself from 3 pieces of evidence.
And from an evolutionary perspective, it's necessary that our brains do that on autopilot.
Exactly.
We cannot really, what's the right word? Take in all of that data and sort it properly unless we have pre-existing boxes that we just pop things into. Otherwise, we'd have to have so much energy going to our brain to do that thing that we wouldn't have energy for anything else. So it's important that it's streamlined and we have those few boxes and our brain's just like, okay, there. For me, it's just knowing that that's what my brain does. And if there's assumptions in there, I get to question them, especially if they're affecting my lived experience with myself and in my relationships, to question those assumptions, because the brain's going to categorize no matter what we do. It's just the function of the brain. And to know that, okay, that's what my brain does. And I get to question that thing and put it in a different category or have it in no category at all if I so choose.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, this is why one of my favorite forms of meditation, I don't meditate a lot, but one of my favorite forms of meditation is the one where you're just labeling the type of thought, like noticing the thoughts and going, oh, judgment. And, or, oh, labeling, right? And for my brain, that's actually a really lovely thing, because it's not saying, oh, I shouldn't be categorizing thoughts and I need to just let go of this meta layer of categorization that my brain is always doing. That can actually be the meditation in itself. So that's something I've enjoyed.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, I know that you are a person, again, that I could talk to for a very long time about a very wide variety of topics. And I would like to start wrapping up. So my final 2 questions for you are where people can find you, and also who you'd like to connect with, because I know you mentioned that before we started the call. And then also what advice you'd like to give to yourself at another age and what that age is.
So if people do want to find me, they can find me at strengthdiscovered.com, on social media at Strength Discovered. I'm on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at the moment. We'll see how all that shakes out in the near future. Advice I would like to give to myself: you're not broken. The system you're born into is broken. Yeah, because there's a lot of shame. And still, for me, the deconditioning process from religion, there's still a lot of shame pieces that come up, and just knowing that I'm not the one that was broken.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I know I'm still working on receiving that message again in an embodied way, right? Because
Me too.
Intellectually, it's so easy for me to look around and say, oh, we're not broken. And then myself, do I still feel deeply broken sometimes? Yes.
Oh.
And who are you particularly interested in connecting with?
Over the course of this winter, I really got into a hibernation or creation phase, I guess you could say, and really getting clear on how to share and teach the concepts that I've been embodying to people who have been in religion. Because for me, that transition out of religion, nothing felt safe to use as a framework, because it was always framed in this higher power aspect in somewhere within the framework. And that didn't work. And in a lot of ways still doesn't work for me. So anyone who's been in religion and needs a belief neutral framework to experience healing in, that's the direction I'm moving in. That's the people I want to connect with, who maybe are just a few steps behind me. Because, God, I'm probably going to cry. That's okay. I'm a crier. If I would have had someone to be able to hold space for me in the way that I'm able to hold space for myself now, and give me some of those the belief neutral structure to do that within, it would have been so much easier. So if anybody has had that experience where we're in religion and maybe you're struggling to find something that isn't triggering to use as a framework to move forward, that's the direction I'm moving in. And just as concepts to understand and contemplate, not as truth.
I love that. Yay. Thank you so much. This is such a lovely conversation. And we will put those links in the show notes for people. And I will talk to you all next week. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.